or to the cloud, because that seems to work a bit better. So just let me know that it's recording. Good, perfect. Okay, so we've got a few students here, which is awesome. Okay, and then I'm going to share screen, and I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint. And as I said, it's just a few slides. I don't want to spend too much time because I'm not the interesting person here. There's far more.
You are very, she is flying. Louise is very interesting.
I'm going to hand it over to the fun people who are going to be leading the program. Okay, so let's do a slideshow from the beginning. Okay, thumbs up if you can see my screen okay and you can see these slides. Perfect. Okay, awesome. So my name is Louise Yaoui, it's pronounced Yaoui if you know how to speak Arabic, that's awesome. But I am an education abroad specialist. I work in the Office of International Affairs in the Global Education Department, and we today are joined by Jared and Beth from the Department of English to talk about the Literature and Culture of London Global Education Programme for May of 22. This is an information session only. It's being recorded, it will be shared on the website, and so you'll be able to share with other people you might know who are also interested in going on the programme. The photographs are not from the London programme, they're just nice pictures that we have from our communications department. So we're going to talk about London and the programme and the credits, and I'll give you some basic kind of admin logistical advice and information, but then really the bulk of this session I want to hand over to Jared and Beth to talk about the content, the experience, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So introductions, as I said, my information is there. I've got a slightly tricky last name, so I'll put it in the chat, and it's good to copy and paste it because it's one that I still get wrong. And then we have the contact information for Beth and Jared. So just to clarify our roles, Beth and Jared very much are the in-country experts, they're the faculty, they're the instructors, they're the academics here. I'm the administration person. I put it all together behind the scenes. I help students with scholarships and grants and so on. So divide your questions after this session in that regard. If you have an academic question, pose that to Jared and Beth. If you have a more of a logistical question, pose that to me. However, we cross-pollinate. So there's no problem if you write to all of us at the same time and we can answer all of your questions at once. In fact, we probably prefer it that way because that way we're all on the same page. So we're excited that we are resuming travel. We are really, really excited in the office to be planning programmings and getting students back overseas. So I've got my first programs going this spring semester, but this program is actually a May session program. It's that summer 4-week one, which lends itself really well to study abroad. So this year is slightly different than in the past because we are moving into a hopefully post-pandemic world, although I may be being a bit optimistic saying post-pandemic, but we're dealing and living with the pandemic in a better way. But we're going to be flying as a group, or you will be flying as a group from Columbus, Ohio on May 2nd of 22. So that's the very end of spring semester, that summer 4-week one. You're going to be arriving into London on May the 3rd. It's an overnight flight. There's no real direct flights from Columbus, Ohio. So you do have to transition through an East Coast airport, which takes you overnight, landing in London on May the 3rd. You're going to depart as a group on May 28th, again from London, and you're going to arrive back into Columbus on May 28th. And that's because of the time difference, allowing for the time change and the travel back across the Atlantic. So those are the dates of the program. As I said, it's all group travel. We have designed it this way for lots of reasons. Group travel is safer in terms of refund and financial liability. We would like to bear that cost rather than have individual students bear the cost by booking flights, and then should something happen that interrupts travel, as my dog, study abroad again, we will not be passing on that expense to you. It's going to be something that we will manage. We also know there's safety numbers, and the number of students maybe are traveling for this first time again since the pandemic, and I want to be assured that they're traveling with faculty experts like Beth and Jared. So we can get better flight deals than you can because we are booking in larger numbers. We have designated student travel agencies, we have refundable policies, and so we just feel it's much more secure as we resume travel to offer the group flight. So The program itself, I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'm going to really leave that to the experts here. But this is a 3-semester hour program, 3 hours of credit. It's an English 4450, which is called Special Topics in Literary Forms and Themes, but really you can petition that to cover some of the different major, minor, or even GE requirements that you might have, depending on your status. If you are an English major, if you are an English minor, petition for the syllabus to go and take it to your advisor in the English department. They will give you credit. If you're a GE student, I know that this will cover culture and ideas, global diversity. It may even cover your second writing class. It may cover a literature GE if you need it. The key is really to get the syllabus from either Jared or Beth, and then take that to whoever is going to be evaluating your credit for GEs in your home department, and they will assist you with that transfer of credit into the GE. The GE is being reworked, so this is the last year it will look the way it looks, but this is still, all this information is going to apply for May of 22. So courses and credits, as I said, 4450 used to fill the GE, can be used, sorry, to fill the GE Diversity, Global Studies and Culture and Ideas on petition, just if you wanted to take a screenshot of this, because those are kind of tricky GE names to remember. But some basics on the program. This is a fun program. This is a program that really lets you live in London, and we've designed it accordingly. So you stay in centrally located apartment accommodation. What centrally located in London means versus what it means in Columbus, Ohio, are two very different things. And that's really a part of this experience. You are going to have a commute to class. We want you to have that public transport experience. So you are going to be living in an apartment style accommodation in a large building in North London, which will allow you to really experience the kind of day-to-day aspects of being in a capital city. You're going to take public transportation down to your classrooms in the centre of London, the very, very centre of London, each day. But you're going to be sharing a room in this hall of residence, this dormitory building, with one other student. It's a really well-appointed building, so you don't have to go, you're not far from transportation, from food, from shopping or anything. But it's really going to give you the ability to cook your own meals, to shop for yourself, to live as an everyday Londoner lives in London. There are going to be group meals, one each week, possibly more, depending on how the itinerary falls out by the end of the programme, or the end of the preparation, I should say, but all the other meals are of your choosing and from your own arrangement and out of your own pocket. So you're going to be buying food at supermarkets, cooking breakfast, perhaps packing a lunch, buying dinner occasionally, or cooking at home as a group. We'll cover much more of this during the pre-departure orientations. This is not the only time that you're going to have to ask questions and get answers to your questions. This just gives you an idea of what the program looks like in basic kind of structure. So the program fee is still to be decided. That's the big question I know lots of students come to these information sessions looking for. We are still working on that. The reason we're still working on it is because flights have only just reopened from the UK to the US for non-citizens, non-permanent residents. So we do have flights under review. We are holding flights. If I was to give you an estimated cost today of what your program will likely be, including your flight, it's going to be in the region of about $6,500. Okay, so that includes your airfare this time. It also includes your accommodation, some of those meals, your local transportation pass, which is good for the tube, the bus, the overground trains, some riverboats in London as well, your health insurance, all of your site visits, entrances, and so on. It doesn't include other items that I'll talk to in a second, but you will want to also budget on top of this program fee the cost of your tuition for 3 semester hours, 3 credit hours, and that credit is going to be based on that credit cost will be based on your residency status, whether you're an in-state or out-of-state student. So for the out-of-pocket expenses, meals are not arranged by the program. As I said, you're going to be funding and finding those yourself, which is pretty exciting and fun to do in London with this great food. So you're going to want to budget for meals, budget for your spending money. If you don't have a passport, you're going to need to get a passport. So account for that cost as well. Any vaccinations that you need to stay up to date with, your cell phone costs, and any excess baggage costs that are not going to be included if you happen to do a lot of shopping in London and need to pay for an extra bag to come back with you. You are going to have your baggage included with the flight costs that we have.
And that happens. I've seen it.
I know. I cannot talk without shame because I have done this many times myself. So those are some additional costs that you're going to want to consider. So a big part of my job and a big part of my reassurance, I hope, during this session is to guide students when it comes to grants and scholarships. And I really want everybody who is watching either right now or watching in the future through the recorded session to reach out to me, to speak with me with honesty and candor about their situation and give me the privilege of being able to help you find money. The great news is that we work at Ohio State, which has got a real investment in international education. And so there is funding through the English department. There is funding through the College of Arts and Sciences, Engineering, Education and Human Ecology. There are multiple scholarships through my office, Office of International Affairs. I work with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I work with undergraduate research grants and fellowships as well. So there are many ways for us to help find you money. All of those links are on our globaleducation.osu.edu website, where you're also going to find the application for this program. So we're going to look at internal and external funding resources. Some of those scholarships are going to be looking at merit, some are going to be means tested, but begin planning early. And by that early, I mean, start thinking about this over the holidays, reach out to me, schedule, we can start talking about funding and we can look at the different options that are out there. But no one watching right now or in the future should feel that this program has a financial burden that you have no idea how to address. Please come to me for advice. And as I said, I'd be really pleased to help you start researching and securing some awards. So eligibility for this program. This program is open to students of any major in academic standing. Preference is given to English majors and minors simply because it's a program from the English department. But in the past, we've had anthropologists, we've had engineers, we've had historians, we've had speech therapists. We've had students from all over campus participate, and there is no preference or requirement for you to have had any travel experience. In fact, you know, we often see the best results in education abroad from students who have never left Ohio before, who really embrace the opportunity, who are excited and immerse themselves as thoroughly as possible in the experience. So do not feel that because you've maybe not traveled, you're not a good candidate. This program is truly open to everybody. And I always use the phrase that we funnel people in, we don't filter them out. We are really looking to open our doors now that we can travel again. We want to see those applications, we want to get to know you. And for that reason, we've made the application process as simple as we possibly can. It's really easy to do. The deadline is January 4. You're going to apply actually at globaleducation.osu.edu. We've updated our name since then, but that link will still take you to our new website. We're going to ask you to attach an advising report to your application, complete some personal information, which is going to self-populate really from your student center. A lot of it is just ticking boxes. You're going to complete some application questions, which are stupendously easy to do. We're not asking for novels. We're asking you to tell us why you're a good candidate, if you traveled before, and why you've selected this program. You're going to pay an application fee of $150. And that really just locks in your application, tells me that you're serious. It allows me to start booking hotel rooms on excursions and taking care of different things for different programs. So it just really confirms that you're interested. We're going to also ask you to then hit submit. Students often do all of these things and then forget to actually hit the submit button. So I always add that as a reminder in, but really that's the process. globaleducation.osu.edu, search for the program name, Literature and Culture of London, and apply by January. I've put January 4 here because January 5th is the actual deadline, but I always put a day earlier so it's in the student's head so they've got 24 hours afterwards. In case, you know, their card doesn't pay the 150 or something like that, we've got a bit of leeway. But we are doing decisions by January 15th. We are not going to be doing any rolling admissions. We are only looking after January 15. So there's no benefit particularly to applying early. We're not going to give you an earlier answer. We're going to assess all the applications at once. So I know people have questions about COVID, so I'm going to touch very briefly on that, but we recognize that there's continuing uncertainty of international travel due to the pandemic. We are monitoring professional health and safety resources to assess the viability of all programs and destinations, and we're proceeding cautiously with summer term 2022 plans. As I said, we have students traveling this spring, so I think that gives you an indication of where we're hoping to be for summer 22. Final decisions regarding travel are expected on or around January 29th. It may be even earlier than that in a positive sense. So just keep your eyes on our website, but do know that we're really taking this seriously. And that's, again, reflecting back on that inclusion of the group flight this year to make sure that everybody is protected financially as well as in terms of health and safety, and that we will keep you as updated as we can. All of the COVID-19 updates are going to be on the globaleducation.osu.edu website, which should be your homepage really for any part of this process. You'll keep on coming back to it. But with that, I'm going to ask if there are any immediate questions. I would prefer that we had questions at the end because I really want to give as much time over to Jared and Beth, because as I said, they're the exciting folks here, not me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then I'm going to open it up to Jared and Beth.
I have to unmute myself. Thank you. I am going to share my screen. I have a very small little PowerPoint. Can you see that? Let me do. Is that visible?
Yep,
yes?
We can see it.
Oh, good. Wonderful. So hello, my name's Beth Hewitt, and Jared is the other faculty advisor on the program. We also happen to be married to each other, so we get along.
What a coincidence!
I know. so you don't have to worry about that. This is actually a program that we had planned for last year, and it's something that Jared and I have been talking about for a while, that kind of brings together our respective interests. In addition to the interest in London, as you can tell from the title of the class, Speculative London, and some of the material that we circulated ahead of time, we really are excited to use the streets of London, the spaces in London, as well as literature set in London, about London, to think about London as this center of speculation. And we're kind of using the term speculation in a really loose way to mean it was the center of finance since the 16th, I was going to say the 17th century. And it's also really been the center of what we might describe as being imaginative speculation, which we mean kind of in two ways. One, it's always been a literary center, a kind of hub of English literature. But even more specifically, it's been a really important space for a lot of science fiction writers and historical romance writers, and who are thinking kind of about imaginative pasts. And so what we wanted to do for this class is kind of bring those two things together, having you kind of think about how those two kinds of speculation go together, and how we can see how they go together really well by essentially reading both literature and also, as I said, the streets of London. So that's the kind of that's our large project, which is why, as Louise said, the course will end up, I think, covering a lot of different possible requisites for you, because we are going to be reading literature that's before 1800, before 1900, and the 20th century. So we can make a credible case that it would cover all sorts of requirements for English majors. So here I'm the undergraduate studies director. So I'm living learning goals. So I thought I would just kind of write them out. Essentially, what we want to do is to take you to visit tons of historical and cultural sites in London, Originally, and I think this is still the plan, we also wanted to do a day trip to Bristol. And kind of, be studying London history and London culture, and especially thinking about, as I put it in the second bullet point, this simultaneous birth of modern print, modern capitalism, and modern slavery, and think how they come together in literary texts, which is part of the reason we're going to go to Bristol, because that was really the largest center for the slave trade in the 18th century in England. We want to talk a lot about immigration and read lots of texts about immigration to London specifically. To a certain extent, we'll think about England, but we're really thinking about large migrations of people to London. We want to think about architecture. And that's why we're going to need to hit the streets and wander through the tube and take a look at how the city manages its diverse people. And then we're also going to, as I said, really think about science fiction, to think about why it is that authors might turn to London so often to think about urban life, because that's the other thing. We can think about this moment in the 18th century as the birth of print, capitalism, but also modern urban life in many ways, which London is an epitome. So one of the, eventually I'll be able to tell you with more detail about various trips that we're doing. Oh, and Jared, you should feel free to interrupt me at any point. So
no, you're the only thing
okay.
I was going to say about London is just, as you said, this is the city that's constantly both reinventing itself and imagining new futures, both through changes in its population, through its kind of remaining a central hub for international capitalism, as capitalism continues to change over the course of its now 4 centuries, but also a place that as Beth said, is a place where some of the kind of worst aspects of our history as human beings in the West kind of came together, as kind of epitomized by the kind of global imperialist projects of London in the 18th and 19th centuries, and London's kind of central role in the Atlantic slave trade, but also the place in which the imagination of better futures and alternate paths is always taking place. So it's a place that's constantly changing, thinking about its past, and trying to imagine better futures that don't always come about, but that has given birth to I think some of the most exciting science fiction in the world. I mean, science fiction is a global genre, but I think it's fair to say that even though I'm an American literature person by training, that British science fiction is the coolest, because I think these folks just have a head for speculation. I should also say that Beth would not say this about herself, so I'm going to say it for her. She is also an expert on literature and finance, and which is not a subject that sounds maybe very sexy to a lot of English majors, but she makes it very cool. She knows a whole lot about the history of money and finance and early capitalism, and about London's role in it, and about how it kind of gets represented and shaped by literature as well. Sorry, that was my Beth pitch there. You can take it.
Well, and in fact, as the picture on the left shows, one of the things that I want us to do is to visit these historical spaces and really kind of think about the way, almost think about it like an archaeology, the ways in which things have built up on them. So, I want to take you to Threadneedle Street to learn about the Bank of England, but then also wander over to the Isle of Dogs, where we see that the financial center has kind of shifted, and read about the literature of the housing boom, as well as another thing I want to take us to do is to kind of I'm going to have you read one of the things that you'll be reading is important Black Atlantic writer who was an important abolitionist, but he also talks about his captivity narrative and talks about wandering in London, and we want to kind of follow the streets that he traveled. We're going to tour the Spitalfields neighborhood because we want to talk about the importance of immigration and the kind of historical trajectory from the Huguenots to the Jews to the Bangladeshi, and now to a neighborhood that is, from what I can tell, is increasingly unaffordable. So we want to think about those issues. We're going to read some fiction from about the Windrush generation. And one of the things that we want to do is to really think about London architecture and as it's changed, and kind of work through the streets that way.
Professor, what's the Windrush generation?
The Windrush generation is the name that is used to describe the generation of immigrants from Jamaica that begin right in the post-war period. And there's a couple of new novels actually about historical novels, and I'm excited to have us read maybe one or a story from that period as well.
Yeah. And I'll also just say that is also, so one of my kind of core focuses, I teach a lot of film and I teach a lot of popular culture and popular culture history. And so those migrations, especially the Windrush generation, is also really crucial for its impact on British music, and by extension, eventually music in the United States as well, including, of course, as it kind of culminates in the rise of hip hop at the end of the 70s. So there's a lot of interesting kind of things to be thinking about in terms of broader pop culture history that kind of echoes out from these kind of extended migrations of people through London and to London that has huge global consequences for a lot of the aspects of popular culture that we live with today.
Yeah. I should say that one of the things that Jared and I are really eager to do is visit. We want to take you across the wide expanse of London. So we want to, we'll be staying in North London, but we're going to be traveling. Our classes will be in the center of London, but we're also going to be in East London. We'll be in South London. So we'll be wandering everywhere. And indeed,
a lot of time on buses and tubes, right? which is awesome. You're going to love it.
In some sense, speculation is one theme in the class, but the other, in some sense, is transportation. Sort of thinking about how much London literature is about moving people and things around the world, because it is this hub, this incredibly important economic and cultural and literary hub. These are just more neighborhoods to show you. And I also, Jared will tell you that I'm too avid a museum fan, but I promise that I will be good. Because
wait, we got to pause here. This is important. This woman, left uncontrolled, would literally museum you to death. And I want to say that I am dedicated to giving you exits, because she so loves museums. She would just go from one museum to another, and I have watched our kids literally collapse at the end of a 4-week dance marathon. That's not going to happen. I will make sure that we keep her in control. But on the other hand, she's very excited. She's very passionate. You're older, but fortunately, I have bum knees, so I'll keep things slow. So we'll be okay.
But we're gonna go visit the British Library, the Tate Gallery, the National Portrait Gallery, the Docklands Museum, the Museum of London. I'm really excited to take you to Victoria and Albert Museum, because one of the things that we're going to be talking about is actually think back to when I mentioned Spitalfields, because one of the things we're going to be reading is Alan Moore's comic about Jack the Ripper, From Hell, which literally takes in the comic, we travel around London, and it also tells about the 19th century kind of utopian projects, speculative utopian projects. And one of the figures of that utopianism is William Morris. And in the Victoria and Albert, we'll get to take a look at some of Morris's artifacts. He was a beautiful designer. If I showed you pictures, which
And
I
a
don't have in my
speculative
PowerPoint,
thinker. Yeah, I mean,
and a
he's
speculative
also,
thinker.
he was somebody who was imagining better futures. I mean, he was a socialist thinker and a utopianist who really believed that capitalism could work better. And so he's a great example of that speculative London kind of impulse. And he shows up as a character in Alan Moore's book as well. There's also, Beth, I just realized, I just heard about this. There's a new museum specifically dedicated to working class women in the Spitalfield area that just opened up as a kind of counterbalance to the kind of somewhat gross Jack the Ripper tourism. So we'll do some looking into it, but it sounds really interesting. I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, especially because one of the things we'll want to talk about is Groniasa, whose wife was actually a Spitalfield weaver. Right. And now I know I promise you, I have this picture of lots of books, but I promise you we're not going to be reading all of them. I just wanted to give you a sense of some things that we may be reading, even some things that we'll just be reading small parts of. We'll probably read a little bit from the Spectator paper. We'll maybe have you read a little bit from Mayhew. This Lovely City is the new novel that I think that we may want to actually read the whole of, but we won't have a whole lot of long novels. And really, I guess what I want to say is that we want to be reading the space of London as much as we're reading the literature. And part of here's one way to put it. I love science fiction and fantasy when they open with maps in the beginning, because they give us this world, and then you try to place yourself in the map, and when you're reading it, you try to figure out where you are. In some sense, what I want us to do is to do that with London, but not only will we get to look at maps, but we'll actually get to walk the maps. And so we'll be able to kind of experience London as if it were a science fiction or a fantasy novel. That's kind of my dream. I also should tell you, I really love maps. So we'll be spending some time looking at old maps of London too. And then we'll also probably go to some of the literary houses. Maybe not all of these, but I know that when Jared and I last went to London, we took students to London, and this would have been, oh gosh, probably 16 years ago. Is that right?
It was right around the 2008 crash, so probably not quite that, around 2008. Yeah.
Okay. And the students really loved going to, for example, the Dickens house, because you could see Dickens' desk. I don't know if they really love going to the Freud Museum that much, but they really loved going to the Sherlock Holmes Museum. So we'll want to do that kind of thing as well.
They did not like the Freud Museum. I'm just telling you. We're not doing the Freud Museum unless you want to, and we'll take you as a side trip, because it's super cool. But I just remember the students last time, they were like, yeah, that wasn't our favorite.
So that gives you a little bit of, and in terms of, I guess what the other thing Jared and I've talked about is the last thing in the world we want you to be doing when you're in London is spending lots of time in your room writing research papers. And so really much of the assignments are going to be journals, video essays, photographic essays that kind of require you to be, basically are asking you to use your travel experience, your experience actually living in London, to kind of reflect on our reading. So
that's exciting. Yeah, maybe a good time to pause and see if there are any questions.
I'm at the end, so I can stop sharing.
Perfect. So yeah, we'd be delighted to kind of answer any questions. One thing I can tell you, Beth and I are also, this is not, I think, unimportant. Like we are people who love traveling. We have traveled with students. We've traveled with our own children. This has probably been the hardest part of the pandemic in many respects for me, especially, who's a travel junkie, is not being able to travel. So this will be our first time traveling since the pandemic began. And we take safety, your safety especially, incredibly seriously. We will be in constant consultation back to Louise and getting kind of guidance from conditions on the ground. Obviously, we now live, as we understand it, as Louise says, we might be moving to a post-pandemic world, but we're not moving to a post-COVID world. We're moving to a world in which we're shifting from pandemic COVID to what we're going to, I think, eventually understand as endemic COVID, something we're going to learn to live with the way we live with other contagious diseases, and that we can kind of modulate and moderate its effects through vaccines and best practices. And so, we are going to be getting that balance exactly right every day between giving you guys the freedom, flexibility you need to explore and have the most amazing adventure of your life, but also making sure that you're safe. And we're not going to let things get to a place where, there's any kind of chance that we're putting you guys in unnecessary danger, but we're also not going to suffocate you unnecessarily. We're going to strike that balance so that you guys really are having an experience that, even if it's, yes, will be different in some ways. Will there be some places that are, potentially closed or limited in ways they weren't before? Yes. But London is ramping back up to welcome us, and we are ramping back up to go into its open arms. So I think this is going to be a happy encounter. And there's nothing like London. I grew up in New York City. New York City is not a city I love for a bunch of reasons, but it's an exciting, dynamic city. But London, which is every bit as big and crowded, sometimes feels more kind of dynamic than New York. London, I adore. It's just got an energy like no place on earth. And I know from past experiences with our own children, with students, that it is a transformative experience. My own junior year, I spent in Edinburgh in Scotland. It was a tremendous experience. I fell in love with that city. I still love that city. But I will confess, it's the couple of weeks I spent in London during that long year that still kind of resonate most strongly in my memory, because it just rewires your brain in really good ways. And I think that's why so much amazing imaginative literature and thinking and fantasies about the future and the past have come out of this city. It feels, as many people believe, like there's something magic going on underground in that city that makes for a fairly unique place in the world to visit.
3 of the science fiction novels that we're thinking that I'm thinking about, they all, in fact, literally imagine magic underground in London.
Yeah, it's a pretty common belief, and we know the Druids were there, so it's possible. And there's actually a great history of London that kind of goes back to the kind of earliest inhabitants that we know about. We're not going to be reading it, I promise. It's ginormous, but I'm going to be rereading it so I can bore you with tons of trivia while we're walking around the city. So, because it's a great book. I'm looking forward to rereading it, because it is, it's a city that is incredibly old. We will stumble over, as Beth said, layers of history that will take us back, not just to Roman times, but sometimes long before. And it's a city that's constantly digging up parts of its past that didn't know existed. Because again, it's a city that largely burned to the ground in 1666 and had to reinvent itself, had to rebuild itself. And it's a city that, like England itself, kind of took shape in a kind of uneven way and developed slowly until it suddenly exploded into being what it remains today, the kind of epitome of the modern city. And the fact that it's remained the epitome of the modern city really from the 17th century to this moment is remarkable. Like lots of cities rise and fall, but London is always London. So there is some magic there for sure. Any questions from anyone? You don't have to even go, you don't even have
Well,
to go on screen.
I'm going to say thanks for speaking so enticingly about my home city. I love to hear other people's perspectives on London, and I'm excited to see students travel there again. It's, as you said, it's a dynamic place. It's constantly evolving, and I haven't been back for a while for obvious reasons, you know, and I'm excited to go back and see how it's changed yet again, because
Come with us.
Yeah, it's a city which has made me who I am for sure, and I'm excited always when students are going there to not have this perspective of London as tea and the Queen. There's a lot more to it, and so I also really like that you're going to touch on immigration in this program. I always think that's very important when it comes to discussing London, because London is not who it is without the people, and those people are from all over the world for lots of reasons that they've ended up in London. But I was going to actually make a recommendation. You spoke about the Windrush generation, and that's been in the news a lot recently in the UK. There was a series on Amazon Prime called, I think it's Small Axe, which is really, really interesting. It's a series of short films about the West Indian perspective of being a Londoner, and the different racial and community kind of tensions and involvements. So if you have got some time and you're looking for a really different idea of what London looks like, I recommend that series on Amazon Prime if you have it.
Awesome.
But yeah, immigration visits to the East End are really important. Students always come back on all of our programs saying how just intriguing that part of the city is. And it is one which really shows how much London changes as with generations. From when I was a student, I lived in the East End, and it was almost exclusively Bangladeshi. There are still a couple of Irish families that live there. It was notorious for kind of gangs. We're talking about the craze kind of white male 1960s gangsters. So there's lots of different identities around the East End, but right now it's extremely trendy, extremely expensive, and pricing families out who historically have always lived
all
there.
the
So
new,
you're going to see
the new economy. Yeah, it's dynamic place right now.
Yes, so you're going to see some fascinating things. So yeah, I really encourage students from lots of different disciplines. If you're not an English major and you're watching this, there is room for you to grow and learn on this program and gain academic credit which is relevant for you. So I'm going to just kind of wrap it up. If there aren't any questions, I'm not going to force questions out of people, but our contact information, we're reachable always with anything that you need to ask about this experience, and very open to any kind of question that you might have. So we can put our email addresses in the chat if that's easiest, but yeah, I'll kind of hand it back to you guys, and we can wrap up if there aren't any direct questions.
Hi.
Aubrey,
did you have a question?
Hello. I was wondering if you would be able to describe kind of what an average day might look like, what like a daily schedule would be like for the students on this trip.
Absolutely. Did you hear the question,
I'm
Beth?
sorry.
I can repeat it.
hear you, Aubrey. Okay.
I can repeat it. So Aubrey was asking if we could describe kind of roughly what an average day would look like, which is, I think that's a great question. Beth, do you want to kind of take the lead on that? And I'll just, as she starts keeping us going into the wee hours. No, I'm joking. We will not let her march us into midnight around the city. Tell us your ideal day, Beth.
I guess my ideal day would be that my understanding is that that the program that's kind of organizing it wants us to start each day kind of in a central location. Is that right, Louise? I'm sorry, our dogs are making horrific noises.
You're okay. Mine is too. That's why I went on mute. But yes.
And then, what my thinking is, we'll start the day by kind of, briefly sort of talk, well, sorry, we'll have a schedule so that we'll know what we're doing that day. We'll get together, we'll have a talk about the materials, kind of raise questions, and then we're going to kind of head out to do whatever the field trip is for that particular day. And then and far from keeping you up until the midnight hours, at that point, then you're kind of, you're let loose to do what you want to do in the city. And that will basically be the daily schedule. Does that seem to, Louis?
That sounds right to me. And often what we did last time is Beth and I would often have something else. Like, so if we're going to go do this, that's, has other educational or cultural value, because we're kind of junkies for that stuff. But we also want you guys to never feel pressure. Like, so we're going to have one thing we're going to all do together. And then, especially in the beginning, we'll definitely kind of, just to get us comfortable with public transportation, we're going to kind of come back with you guys and start off together so everybody can get used to how to navigate the buses and the tube. I promise you, in just a few days, you'll be like pros. But it's a little overwhelming at first. So we'll be, definitely there and available always, and always within, a quick text or phone call. We're always going to be 24/7 available to you. But as Beth said, we're going to kind of try and keep the official day limited so that there's also time for your exploration and your discoveries and shopping, right? And other fun things. London just has so much going on, but there'll always be something that we're almost inevitably going to be doing that will kind of open us an option. So last time we were there, I remember we had a kind of optional trip to go to the Globe on top of what we had scheduled, and some of the students came and some didn't, and there's no, it's all good. It's really what folks want to do. We went to see a play that we hadn't realized was there until we got there, about some of the kind of tensions and possibilities that have kind of emerged at the time. And this was, again, around 2007, 2008, in terms of some of the parts of London where the African and West Indies immigrant communities were kind of living in proximity to each other and trying to figure out how to kind of build community together. And the play was wonderful. The playwright was there and talked about it. But that was something that literally just kind of showed up. London is filled with theater. It's just amazing. Like, it's in a world of theater that we can't imagine here in the States. It plays a much more vibrant, dynamic role. So if when we hear about a cool play, we'll say, hey, we're going to the play. Anybody wants to come with us, you're more than welcome. But we're also never going to kind of pressure you to kind of stay kind of in with us, following our kind of absurd schedules. But we'll be going into the night because I have no choice. I'm married to her.
Well, I think that's exactly right. We will be doing things, and we will always invite you to come with us, including shopping.
Yeah, it's true. We like shopping a lot.
And food shopping.
Oh, yes. And actually, that's going to be part of the fun too. And we will also make time and space to, to kind of talk about kind of some of the ways in which we can explore some of the local markets and some of the remarkable kind of stores that kind of serve the different immigrant communities around the city, and to kind of explore some of the kinds of experiments with cooking and food that can come when you live in such a remarkable multicultural city.
Does that help, Aubrey?
Yes, it does. If you can hear me.
Yes, perfect.
Now you sound great.
Yeah. No, that was a really good kind of introduction to a typical day. Generally, we say you have some academic instruction, discussion, orientation in the morning, and then you have a reflective site visit in the afternoon, and then your evenings are typically free or guided, as Jared and Beth just said, you know, depending on what the resident directors are doing, if you want to join them. But we really do design these programs so that you do get some time to exploit all the resources available to you, particularly in a city like London. We want you to go out, we want you to explore, we want you to develop and write your own narrative for your experience. So it's important that you do make use of your free time, that you're not sitting in a dorm room, you know, watching Netflix. We really discourage that kind of behavior. We want you to be out in the evenings, and there really is nowhere better, in my opinion, in terms of world cities than London in the summer. It's amazing. People come out. There's a lot of green space in London. They are picnicking, they are playing frisbee, playing cricket. You will really get to see how people live in London in the summer. People make use of every second of daylight they get. So it's a really joyous time to be there, because there's always stuff happening in London, but particularly when the weather starts getting better, people really start having a good time. So yeah, lots of cultural and stereotypical revelations about what Brits are like are going to come to the surface, but at the same time, you can observe from a distance or participate as much as you would like to.
You will realize they can outdrink
yeah,
us. That's one thing you will learn for sure.
That's you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying.
you think that we Buckeyes are good drinkers. We got nothing on them.
No, that's that old Anglo-Saxon heritage that really comes out in the summer. But it's a great city, and I will say about the food, do not believe the nonsense about British food being terrible. No. There are amazing things happening, and that have always happened. And I will say that, you know, one of the there's a long shadow cast by colonialism, but one of the benefits of the long shadow is the great influence of food from around the world. So I grew up in southwest London, I should say, in an area which is distinctly Korean and has been for almost 100 years. And so this new idea of Korean food coming to Columbus is really interesting, because this is the food that I ate as a child growing up in southwest London. There's interesting things happening all over as a result of, you know, people finding a home in that city. So the museums are amazing. The V&A is my favorite museum. The British Museum close second. Shopping is fabulous. We will give you as much guidance as you ask for and as much as you need, but really we want you to explore yourselves. And so the program has got a lot of free time and in that sense built into it. But yeah, it's a great time to be there. And hopefully with things really having opened up, you will have every opportunity that you would have had if you had gone 2 years ago.
Right. And unlike, I think, you know, one thing just to kind of realize is that I think sometimes at OSU, we think of our faculty, I think, unfortunate, and I don't think it's true for many of us, but I think there's often a feeling, because the school is so big, that maybe the faculty aren't available for you. You don't want to be a nuisance. This is a situation. Come with us to London. You can bother us as much or as little and never be a bother. We are literally there for you to help make this experience good. We're not there for, you know, we're gonna have a great time, but we're having a great time because we're gonna be there with you. Like the joy of sharing this experience with you is the reason we're there. And so, you know, we are not going off to do research. We're not going off to conferences. We're there. You know, if something happens at 2 in the morning and you need one of us, we'll be there. And so you don't have to you can also explore that freedom, knowing that, you know, there's old folks back at the apartment who have your back, so you can call on us anytime.
Well, I think we will wrap it up here unless anybody has any other questions. Jared and Beth, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And I just, you know, Grace, you came on, you turned your camera on. Did you have a question for us?
Okay, I do have a financial question, but I will just email you with that because it's a bit more like applicable to me. But I just want to say, like, this sounds so exciting, and I'm like would definitely love to go on this trip if I can make it work. But yeah, I just like
reach out to me and let's explore every avenue we can to get you there. You know,
okay.
Louise is so good at making this. Louise is so good at that. She is the expert who will find ways, if there are ways, to make this possibility work out.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And I'm in your film class, Professor Gardner.
I
so
know.
I
Yes, I was.
there
We never
earlier.
get to see each other without masks. So,
Yeah.
yes, and we'll definitely be kind of looking at a couple of films along the way too, because films are a great way to kind of explore a text that only kind of takes 90 minutes to consume. So,
Right.
so there's some great film adaptations of some literary texts that would probably be too long for this event, but kind of can give us a feel for both mediums, and to then kind of go out into the city that we're seeing on film is also super fun.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for all the information.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you guys for coming. We're super excited to be able to take you to London. I can't even tell you how excited.
Thanks, everybody.